our Wi-Fi is very weak. So we can't have everybody on Wi-Fi. So Jim has it, and I think that's it. Jim and I checked the power of the Wi-Fi and both agreed that if everybody was on the Wi-Fi, it would get really fragmented, or whatever the word is, and not have a very weak signal. So I'm sorry about that.
Right. And the reason we need the signal is that in part of our making the Zoom recording, we have to have a Wi-Fi connection to be able to do it. So, but I'm delighted that you're all here, and as we said, we hope that some of the others come in. I'm particularly excited about this session because over 2 years ago, as the New Thing Task Force was struggling to design this and figure out what would work, Pam Schellenberg, is that her name, who was BTS Center? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pam was at the conference annual meeting at the Laconia Center, and she and I got talking about this leadership thing. We were trying at that point to partner with BTS Center to perhaps do this, and she said, you know, we don't have the bandwidth to be able to do it, but you know who's already done it is the New England Synod Lutherans, and you need to go talk with Kimberly Bergsford. And in the real spirit of ecumenical cooperation, Kim has given inordinately of her time in helping us process and work through not only what this series will look like, but what the second year will be about as well. And so it is my great pleasure to have finally met Kim in person today and to introduce her to you and have her be our leader for the session today. So Kim.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Good morning. It is a pleasure to be with you today because I have been talking back and forth with the members of the New Thing Task Force and Jim and Gail about different aspects of your initiative here and the 2-year plan for this learning experience. As Jim said, I am with the New England Synod. I am on Synod staff. My title is Associate for Mission. I work with our new starts. We have 13 new ministries developing around. Oh, thank you. I know you can tell, right? I'm like I'm gonna go. I'm a mover. I'm sorry, Jim, if that messes up your recording. So I work with our new starts. Those are our new mission developments, and there are a variety of different ministries. Right now, we don't have any in New Hampshire, but the rest of the Synod, we have quite a few in the Boston area, in Western Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and in Vermont, and one in Portland, Maine. And they're multicultural. We're doing ministry with folks that are experiencing homelessness. We have street ministries. We are working with a lot of the new growth is in our Hispanic immigrant communities as well. We have a Chinese Lutheran church in Quincy. So, and I'm actually going to be with the Indonesian Emmanuel Lutheran in Newington tomorrow. So that is part of what I do. The other part is redevelopment and renewal and congregational vitality. That's where our learning process connects with yours. I co-facilitate the Forward Leadership Community, which is our learning initiative developing leaders, lay leaders and clergy for the 21st century church. So we're working on adaptive change, looking at paradigm shifts. We work with Holy Cow and use their assessment tool, which you folks will be, if you're not already engaged with the assessment tool and administering, you will be during the summer at some point. I also am like a liaison to the national church, so I work with the folks in Chicago as well. So I have a foot in New England and a foot in Chicago and a foot in 6 states. I tend to be, my office is on the road. The trunk of my car is filled with stuff like this all the time. So it's great to be with you today. We're going to be talking about visioning. And I'm actually going to share with you one of our workshops that we do with the Forward Leadership community. I've adapted it to your context a little bit as well. But now that you know a lot about me, I don't know much about you folks except for Newfields Community Church. So if we could just take a minute and maybe start here, introduce yourselves, your congregation, and if you could let me know if I went to your neighbor, wherever your congregation is, if I went to your neighbor, maybe the gas station down the street, and I asked them, what do you know about that church? What would they tell me?
We four are from the Long Meadow Congregational Church, UCC, which is in Auburn, New Hampshire. And nobody knows why it's called the Long Meadow Congregational Church. I'm assuming there was a long meadow somewhere that has been built on at this point. And you want to know what would people say? Did I skip anything else?
Yeah, if I asked them, yeah, what's with this Long Meadow Church?
I honestly think in our community, one of the first things people would say is, oh, they're the people that put on the breakfasts.
The breakfast.
We have a breakfast twice a month, community breakfast that people come to, and it's been going on more than 12 years now. And that's how people know. And I would say that, and that we serve the community. We work and create relationships and partnerships with the school and all different groups in town in order to do things together and to kind of spearhead different things for the town. And a lot of people know us for that and are involved with us for that.
Great, thank you. Nick?
I'm Don. This is Lorianne and Paula. We're from the Laconia Congregational Church, right in the center of downtown Laconia. We have a very large parish house building next to our church. And I think if you were going into a gas station and asking about the church, people would say that's the place that's known for having many meetings during the week in the parish house building for Alcohol Anonymous, Narcotic Anonymous, mental health issues. I mean, I think I heard the other day there's between 150 and 200 people a day that come into our building, our parish house for meetings. And it just seems to be growing in its need. So I think that's one very prominent thing that our church is known for.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm Maureen, and I'm here with Doug and Susan and Will, and we're from the Amherst Congregational Church in Amherst. And this is an interesting question because this is something we've been wrestling with because we have a sense of who we are, and we feel like it's changed over the last 15, 20 years, that we are a welcoming and serving church. But if you ask somebody who hasn't been in the church ever, who was there 20 more years ago, they might say we are the snooty church. There's a lot of money in Amherst, and kind of a country club church. You belong there because everyone else did. You get contacts there. So this is an image that we're working on trying to undo or change outside. We feel like we're a very welcoming and giving church, and we're out of the community, so we need to change that perception.
Thank you, thank you. And we have Newfields. If you want to add.
Well, I could just say if you go to the country store,
That's
we are beloved over there, and the woman who owns the store does a lot for us and makes our communion bread every month. And so they love us. And I do community. I am out in the community, so I do know people in the community, and it's just slow going. But anyway, I'd say other people might like us. I don't really know. Just a lot of people don't come here. It's just weird. It's weird.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Garcia. I'm with the Harvard Congregational Church in Harvard, Mass. I'm here with Pastor Ed and Andrea. And our church, I'm sure a lot of people in town would say, oh, yeah, I think those are the people that do that Apple Festival every year. And I think I heard something about them looking for a new minister. I think that's really probably all that people would jump in to say.
Great, thank you.
I'm Rebecca Massini. I'm on the task force.
Oh, I'm Andrea Long. I'm with the Congregational.
I'm Kevin Please. I'm here with Bill and John and Ellie. And I think our church is well known as a beautiful historic building downtown in Manchester. It's quite a lovely edifice. But beyond that, we are, I think, extremely well known around the community for all the outreach efforts that we're involved in. And it's a long list of things, from Special Olympics and the backpack program at the school, home to school, and just lots and lots of other things. So very active, but like everybody, we're aging and losing members and wrestling with the same issues. A little bit different scale, but not different in terms of the quality of the experience.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm Joyce Tugel with First Parish Church Dover, and this is Leslie Hawking, who right now is coaching her daughter's soccer team, and she'll be here momentarily. And it is nice. Yes, she's coaching young kids playing soccer. We tour a downtown church, and I think if you went to the gas station, you would know that's the place that people refer you to if you're in crisis. We have a crisis help desk, and we have a thrift shop, and we house the food pantry for our area. And I think we're also known for our music concerts. We have a great music program. And hopefully the newest thing we're known for is people are noticing that little rainbow strip that we put on our sign. We're trying to make our open and affirming presence a little better known in the community.
Thank you, thank you. So it's great to hear a little bit about who you are and what you do. And I noticed a lot of the response of like, what would the neighbors say? What would the gas station say? Are what's, are things, programs, events, except for maybe the snooty, which I don't know. So part of what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the what's the things that we do, the programs, the events, but we're also going to dig down and really think about why. Because a lot of churches do the same what's, right? So if you go down the street, the Presbyterians are doing the meal. They're doing they may not be doing breakfast, but they're doing similar things, or the AA group is meeting there. The thing that is unique for our congregations are your why you do what you do. And this goes down deep into who you are, your identity, your mission, your purpose. And together, sort of the what's and the why can create your vision. So we're going to pray, we're going to reflect, we're going to talk a lot. There's a workbook in front of you. We're going to go over each one of those tools today, because these are different access points where you can approach why God has called you to this place today at this time to these people in your community, not only your members, but in your community. So we're thinking about that. A little bit different than we normally do. So it's going to be a little bit hard to kind of dig into that why, but I think we can do it together. So I want to start with scripture. Can somebody read this aloud for me? Because I'll do a lot of talking today. It's small. Anybody close that can see it?
When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And then he began to say to them, Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.
So listening to that, what do you think Jesus's why is? Why does he do what he does?
He has a message to change the lives of these people that he's speaking to,
Mm-hmm.
which is, in this case, it's his hometown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To reveal himself to the people.
There are no right, wrong answers. I just want to hear.
He's clear on his purpose.
Mm-hmm. Very clear.
Because the Spirit of the Lord is upon him.
Mm. Mm. So we're going to keep, any other comments? We're going to keep this in mind, and we're going to revisit at the end of the day today. So we're thinking a little bit about the why, and we see here a lot of the what. What's going to happen? What he intends to do. So 2 hands today, whys and whats, and they go together, okay? All right, we're calling today finding your why. So we're talking about why you do what you do. And that is your identity, your purpose, your mission, your vision. And we're not talking about nostalgia. So a lot of times what I get is why we do what we do is because we've always done it that way, right? That's not a vision. Or we do this because we think this is what we ought to do. This is what we're supposed to do, which is not on, there's no model other than what's in your Constitution or whatever. There's a few things you're supposed to do, but why God has called you to this place in this time in your own context, everybody's congregation is unique and everybody's community is unique, although they may look like small town New England, right? So your why will be unique to you and your context. And as I said, we have a lot of whats, right?
The thing that's been going through my head throughout this is that, those of us who are here may have identify and come to a consensus on the why.
Yeah.
But I don't think the entire congregation
Has.
have a consensus. That people are there for different reasons.
Right.
The why is different. And are we going to talk about that
Yeah,
today?
yep. People that will come together, they have a different view on why they're there. We're going to do a little exercise. We're going to listen to one another, and you'll see those diverse experiences of why they are there. One of the things that we try to do in forward leadership is to determine like this larger why. So when we are moving through adaptive change, moving through a paradigm shift, if you're changing the culture of your congregation to be more welcoming, more hospitable, to be dealing with conflict and things like that, having this why, this purpose, this vision that not everybody has to like completely agree, but this is what we agree that this congregation is about and where we're moving forward. It speaks to the heart. And it provides the motivation and momentum to do these changes, whatever they may be for your congregation. So people come initially most likely because they have different needs. They're looking for different things. Maybe they were just baptized there and the family's been there for 1,000 years, right? So they're never experienced anything else. Why do they stay? Why do they stay there? So yeah, we'll have this overarching why, and then talk about the other pieces, the reasons why people are a part of that congregation as well. And this is, you may have a mission statement. This can coincide with your current mission statement, or it could be something that you discover that is different today. I know a lot of congregations do have mission statements. I always ask, like, is it 12 words or less? Is it something that an 8-year-old, you know, can say to their friend, this is what my church family is about, right? How does it communicate directly to the heart? Lutheran congregations, I'm going to out them, they're very famous for putting together a task force and committee, and their mission statement is like this. They want to go from everything like, we are disciples, we're baptized. It's like the Apostles' Creed and the Constitution, and, you know, like all this like one page. And then I go in and I said, so what's your mission statement? And someone's like, oh, it's on the shelf in the, I have no idea. It was really good. We worked on it for 12 years, and we covered all the bases. This is a little different. We're going to be talking about, like, this is what motivates us. This is what gets us together. This is what makes us get up in the morning and come together to worship, to be together, to serve in the community, gets us out the door. So little different. You may have like the formal constitutional type mission statement, but we're doing something a little bit different today. So our why, as I said, goes hand in hand with our what's. A lot of times when you ask somebody, why do you come to this congregation? Why are you part of this church? They will give you what's. The music, the preaching. I like the pastor. I like the knitting group. You know, a lot of what's. So we want to uncover like what's beneath that. What is beneath that? And that's some of our work today. So with our mission developers, which are the folks that plant churches, we do this exercise. There's a video by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. It's a TED Talk. I'm going to show a really short portion of it. It's a 20-minute TED Talk. And we are working with the mission developers, starting something from scratch. So a little bit different than taking an existing congregation and steering it in a new direction. So, but this is really helpful for even you folks that are already embedded in all of the what's and the programming and all of that in our congregation, congregational life, because together as a team, as a congregation, discerning this why, looking at it, what you've done in the past, and exploring where your context has led you today, is almost like starting something new. So you're reinventing, you're discerning what your why is. So we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to watch this video. Hopefully everything works like it's supposed to.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different? Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only great orator of the day. Why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered man flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered man flight? The Wright brothers beat them to it. There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery. And this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operated it. As it turns out, there's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way. And it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. So let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat screen TVs. They've been making flat screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. Here's the best part. None of what I'm telling you is my opinion. It's all grounded in the tenets of biology, not psychology, biology. If you look at a cross-section of the human brain, looking from the top down, what you see is the human brain is actually broken into three major components that correlate perfectly with the golden circle. Our newest brain, our Homo sapien brain, our neocortex, corresponds with the what level. The neocortex is responsible for all of our rational and analytical thought and language. The middle two sections make up our limbic brains, and our limbic brains are responsible for all of our feelings, like trust and loyalty. It's also responsible for all human behavior, all decision-making, and it has no capacity for language. In other words, when we communicate from the outside in, yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. You know, sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and the figures and they say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right. Because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal and want to be a part of what it is that you do? Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have. The goal is to sell to people who believe what you believe. The goal is not just to hire people who need a job. It's to hire people who believe what you believe. I always say that, you know, there's if you hire people just because they can do a job, they'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they work for you with blood and sweat and tears. And nowhere else is there a better example of this than with the Wright brothers. Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley. And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the dot-com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright brothers team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere. The difference was Orville and Wilbur were driven by a cause, by a purpose, by a belief. They believed that if they could figure out this flying machine, it'll change the course of the world. Samuel Pierpont Langley was different. He wanted to be rich and he wanted to be famous. He was in pursuit of the result. He was in pursuit of the riches. And lo and behold, look what happened. The people who believed in the Wright brothers' dream worked with them with blood and sweat and tears. The others just worked for the paycheck. And they tell stories of how every time the Wright brothers went out, they would have to take 5 sets of parts because that's how many times they would crash before they came in for supper. And eventually on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers took flight. And no one was there to even experience it. We found out about it a few days later. And further proof that Langley was motivated by the wrong thing, the day the Wright brothers took flight, he quit. He could have said, that's an amazing discovery, guys, and I will improve upon your technology. But he didn't. He wasn't first. He didn't get rich. He didn't get famous. So he quit. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you talk about what you believe, you will attract those who believe what you believe. Well, why is it important to attract those who believe what you believe? Something called the law of diffusion of innovation. And if you don't know the law, you definitely know the terminology. The first 2.5% of our population are our innovators. The next 13.5% of our population are our early adopters. The next 34% are your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. The only reason these people buy touch-tone phones is because you can't buy rotary phones anymore. We all sit at various places at various times on the scale, but what the law of diffusion of innovation tells us is that if you want mass market success or mass market acceptance of an idea, you cannot have it until you achieve this tipping point between 15 and 18% market penetration, and then the system tips. And I love asking businesses, what's your conversion on new business? And they love to tell you, oh, it's about 10% proudly. Well, you can trip over 10% of the customers. We all have about 10% who just get it. That's how we describe them, right? That's like that gut feeling, oh, they just get it. The problem is, how do you find the ones that just get it before you're doing business with them versus the ones who don't get it? So it's this here, this little gap, that you have to close, as Jeffrey Moore calls it, crossing the chasm. Because you see, the early majority will not try something until someone else has tried it first. And these guys, the innovators and the early adopters, they're comfortable making those gut decisions. They're more comfortable making those intuitive decisions that are driven by what they believe about the world and not just what product is available. These are the people who stood online for 6 hours to buy an iPhone when they first came out, when you could have just walked into the store the next week and bought one off the shelf. These are the people who spent $40,000 on flat screen TVs when they first came out, even though the technology was substandard. And by the way, they didn't do it because the technology was so great. They did it for themselves. It's because they wanted to be first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe.
Okay. Had anybody seen that before? No? It's a little old. You can tell it's not like HD or anything, but still holds up. Still holds up. So what'd you think? He's not a theologian, so, but it definitely can apply. It's how our organizations function, how we can think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and connect it with that how. So, comment.
Really intriguing. I guess one of the questions is, and maybe I'm wrong, I do have a sense of the church. We definitely know why we're doing something, because we want to show God's love in the world. We have this strong belief in, Jesus and following Jesus, and we want that to be known in the community. Am I out to lunch?
Yeah, I mean, like that is sort of our general why as church, right? We're here because of Jesus, right? The gospel, sharing the gospel. Here, I'm going to share one of the sort of whys of one of the congregations we have in Vermont. So their why is, we are fed by God so that we can feed our neighbors. And they take that and they break that down into, emotional, spiritual, physical, and different ways that they connect. So they're very specific in the way that they're approaching their why. And there is like sort of this overarching why of why we're here. It's getting that specific.
The church that I served in Massachusetts really needed to do some discernment about their why. And when we initially started the process of figuring out why we were doing what we were doing, the answers that we were coming to were to get more people here, to get more people in the seat, to get them to pledge more. It was not because we want to share God's love or God feeds us, we feed others. So we really need to work on our why.
Yeah. And I mean, that's honest, right? It's kind of like a wake-up call, like, is this the why that we feel like we're going to sit here, because then that is not the why that Jesus is calling us into. So having that conversation, I'm glad that they were, they're honest and they're like, this is what we're about. So then you're talking about shifting. There's an adaptive change of shifting about and sifting through and discerning, like, who are we really? And are we going to continue in this capacity? Those are some of the hard questions that do come out of that honest conversation.
Something that you said that is if we were to ask most of our faithful parishioners, the ones that come every Sunday, they've been coming for years and years and years, and if we were to ask them, why do you come here? The majority of them would talk about the what's.
Mhm.
That you referred to. We come for the music. We come because the sermons are inspiring. They talk about what's. We come because we love the craft group, or part of the grab and go program.
Mhm. Mhm.
So as an entire congregation, we don't have a common
Why?
elevator speech of why we're here.
And you know, it's not just the people that come every Sunday. It makes me think about new people that have come into the church. Because we're proud to talk about all the what's. And we think that's selling them on the church. But you really have to stop and wonder, did they pick up on the why?
Yeah.
Because you didn't tell them why. You just told them all the what's.
Mhm.
I think a question that might be helpful as I'm thinking about this is, what is God's why?
Mhm.
Because humanly speaking, we need the Lord to make a difference. We need God to do the work. And I think that if we can understand God's why, then we're tapping into the real power of who He is and what can be done through us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and this is discernment. This is listening. This is holy listening. It's prayer. It's reflection. We'll use some tools to pick up data and to be able to bring that. But it is a listening process because we're not Apple, right? We're not in the boardroom. We're not sitting with a bunch of vice presidents just mapping out what's profitable, how we're going to sell. This is about the kingdom of God, little bit different. So it's a longer process. It's a reflective process where we'll gather in prayer. But it's what we need to do. I think a lot of us have gotten stuck. We've gotten stuck in routine in the what's. At least in my experience, we tend to we're in that routine and have lost that feeling of why we're here and why we're coming together, and to articulate that, especially for folks that we encounter through our ministries. And when we talk about who are members, I ask congregations to think about membership not in terms of a list of folks that give, that are on the rolls that you maybe have an address to, but expand that and think about the lives that you touched each week. And I say, it's funny because I think of the feeding of the feeding of the 5,000. So they said, well, you break off into these little groups of 20. So there were the disciples, they were like, how are we going to feed all these people? And he's like, well, you go break off into a group of 50, 50, 50, 50. So you could be touching thousands of people. If you have a membership of 50 people, and each of those 50 people are reaching 100 people in a week. Think about that. That's a lot of folks that are being touched by your faith community. And we don't often think about that, and think about all of the ministries, the folks that come in for Al-Anon and AA. They're being touched. They're being touched. Are they experiencing the why of your faith community when they are interacting with your folks that attend worship or are active in your ministries? So it's thinking bigger. We're all mega churches. We all go, the mega church down the street's got everybody, but we're all mega churches. In God's eyes, we're mega churches. So that's my little. Any other comments on that video portion?
I just think it's so easy to answer the what question, and I'm struggling with how I would answer the why question.
Yeah.
It's easy to just rattle off. Well, this, but.
Yeah, because the why is that gut thing, right? It's that gut thing. It's that heart thing. I think we're much more comfortable in the space where we can rattle. Well, we have, we have choir, we have all of these things, but, what is it about the choir that makes you feel engaged?
I think one of the challenges with the why is that many of us are shy about our faith. And as was mentioned earlier, the answer to why one would think would be because I get to experience the glory of God, or I learn more about Christ and why I'm doing what I do, and to walk in Christ's footsteps, or how we live in a culture where in some ways Christianity has been hijacked to a degree that many of us, that's not the Christianity we know. And so when we say, I'm a Christian. So instead of saying, why do you go, so we don't say, if somebody says, why do you go to that church? We don't say, well, because, I'm a believer in Christ Jesus, and I love God, and I get so much of that out of this church. We're uncomfortable with that. So it's easier to say the what.
Yeah.
Oh, I love the choir and the pastor, whatever, their hymnals are glorious. I don't know. Those are easy to say and not so personal and not so uncomfortable.
Right. It's a cultural thing. And I will say the Lutheran folks are the same way. We are not going to knock on someone's door, for one thing. We're not going there. And we're not going to stand on the sidewalk and proselytize. And we're going to have a really, really hard time even asking a friend of ours if they want to go to worship with us. We have a really hard time. So what we're finding is it is much easier to invite, to explain our why, a lot of times through action. The entrance points for people to become connected with the congregation are through outreach ministries, different activities, a lot of times the what. So what we're thinking is like, well, knitting group. You may invite someone to the knitting group, but you hope while they're there, they'll learn the why, right? Yeah, and that, I think that is, in terms of being in New England, we're Bible Belt, no problem talking about Jesus and their faith for the most part. Up here, more reserved. So when you're talking about your why, something like we're fed by God so that we can feed others, feed our neighbors, that's much more accessible than saying, because I love Jesus, do you, for folks too, having something like that, which does have a what in it, right? But it is talking a little bit about faith at the same time, and it's tangible. So I'm going to also, one of the events I was at a couple of weeks ago, Bishop Michael Curry, who is the Episcopal presiding bishop, did the wedding. He's kind of famous now, like rock star preacher guy. So he was in Brockton, Mass, and we did a joint Lutheran Episcopalian worship service, and I was there, and I heard him preach. And this was, two denominations, large group of people, people curious, that are just like, ooh, it's the royal preacher coming into town. His sermon, his message was basically 45 minutes long, but it basically boiled down to a why. It was a why. And the why was, I believe that the power of love can overcome the love of power and change the world. That was it. And we were all like, sign me up. Let's go, right? I was ready. Everybody was just fired up. We're going to go out and change the world. But that got to the heart, right? That was like an emotional thing. Like, we believe that the power of love can change the world, right? So that's just an illustration of getting to the why. Of course, it is embedded in faith and in belief, but that was something that moved a whole congregation forward, ready to go out. And let me see, when we passed the piece, it went on for like 45 minutes. We were all ready to go. So Simon talked a lot about that, the limbic brain, and the neocortex. And the neocortex is where the whats are. It's easy to articulate. It's tangible. It's stuff that we can roll off. And then the how and the why being in the limbic brain. And other sources may call this like the reptile brain, where we have that fight or flight or silence. These are emotions and feelings. We can't always put words to what we're feeling. It's sort of that instinctual thing. So you've got trust there. You will align either in the limbic brain. You can either align with the whats or you don't, and you may not even have the words to express that. So what we're getting at is what is going to stimulate that sort of gut feeling for folks. Another illustration is I'm on Team Subaru, and I really don't know how that happened. They worked on me. I'm on my third Subaru, drive them to about 200,000 miles, and then they fall apart, and then I go get another one. And I thought about it. I'm like, I don't even think about like anymore getting a different vehicle. They've just sucked me in, like, totally. And you think about the ads that they have. So the first time I bought a Subaru is I had an infant, a child. We went from like sort of a rickety, I was a Ford person, like a rickety Ford Escort type of thing. And I wanted a safe car. I wanted the safest car ever. If I ever got into an accident, this thing was going to balloon up and we'd be fine, right? Like covered in bubble wrap. So they got me. They like, we have all these, all these airbags that are going to come up, and we're #1 in the safety rating, and we've got all-wheel drive on all makes and models, and great mileage, and they get me. And then like I'm going to buy another car. I'm not quite as fragile infant child. Now I've got my second child, and you kind of like the poor thing. I'm like come on, we're going. But I'm sold again because like you look at their ads. It's like Subaru's about love and family and blah, blah, blah. So they're getting me. They're getting me. I don't even really realize it, and I'm not even looking at other vehicles. I'm like, nope, I'm just gonna we're gonna get the Impreza this time, like there we go. So you can see how that works, and even more recently with my son, and he's a senior in high school, so we've been doing the college thing for the last 2 years, trying to figure out what colleges to go to, and it came down to two. One was University of New Hampshire. Yeah. The other one was a very small school, liberal arts school in Massachusetts, Stonehill College. And so he was like back and forth. I don't know if I want to go to the big university or the little teeny school. So we applied, and he was accepted to both. And we get the packet from UNH, which was, they sent us a sticker and this is all information, a lot of information. Stonehill College sent us little letters and notes like from the president saying, we're praying for you. And whatever decision you make, we're keeping you in our prayers. And then somebody else from the admissions office sent another note saying, I really enjoyed reading your essay. It's wonderful to learn how somebody becomes a black belt. And I'm like, they read it. So I'm trying to stay out of this, but I'm like, ooh, I like them. So they were getting at that emotional thing with me, whereas UNH sent us a lot of information. There's a lot of what's. Like, they had great programs, they had great stuff to offer. And then Stonehill was working on the more emotional connection with us, and he's going to Stonehill. No offense for UNH, but and I didn't do anything. He decided on his own. So, but that's how that works. That's how that works. And as Simon said, you know, we believe, you know, what we believe. And other people will want to believe what we believe. So they believe he was important. They believed that prayer was important, which connected to me, right? That he had gifts that could contribute to that community. So they reeled us in with their whoever their marketing department working on that. So any questions about the golden circle, the human brain type of things? You may have learned stuff like this, especially in terms of conflict. We think about this stuff with adaptive change, because a lot of times people react with the limbic brain part in response to change, rather than you can give them a whole bunch of information and they'll still resist, even though it's completely logical, rational, why we're going to take down the paneling and paint the wall. There will be somebody that says, no, we can't do that, right? Right? You could give them every reason under the sun why this is a really great idea, but no, because there's a change, and maybe it is hitting something else, more of an adaptive challenge for those folks.
I'm just making a connection here, and part of what Holly said earlier about people having a perception of Christianity. And we're getting some new families that are moving into our community. Amherst is a turnover of people selling their houses, and newer families with younger children coming in. And quite often we hear from these families that they're coming to our church because of our O&A policy. And we're welcoming to all. And that's something that they value in their family, they want to teach their children. So they're not necessarily coming for the music program or even the kids program. They're coming because we have a value that they value. So that is kind of counteractive to the traditional understanding of Christianity. The why is we have a welcoming table, we're welcoming to all, because we believe God is welcoming to all. So that's something that people can buy into. And I'm thinking early adopters, kind of 10% of people start coming because they want to try this church they've never been in before. And hopefully it will grow from there. So why?
Yeah. When you do the cat, we'll talk about those folks that are on the fence. And in that illustration of the law of innovation diffusion, you have that big curve in the middle. Those are the fence sitters. So those are the people that are, you're on the radar, but they're not quite in, right? So you have that tipping point, those early adopters that are there, and if they can communicate and they're expressing a why, you're more likely to get those folks that are in the middle, that are on the fence, in there. And I'll share the PowerPoint with everyone too as well.
And we had the question up here.
Oh,
That wasn't my question. It was just some things that he brought up in the video using Apple and companies. You relate that to Subaru. So that, of course, my brain goes to is any I think that's marketing 101, is how do you hook them in? So it makes those kinds of things like, oh, I feel like I'm being swindled, because they know how to get me to buy stuff. But obviously that would not be us, so trying to make this golden circle, coming from an honest place. And so we're really trying to I think that's something we have to consider is when we do try to put out our why, that we,
It truly is.
try to, make it come from a place like people want to second guess, like, well, why are you bringing me to this meeting?
Yeah.
And, but so that was another one observation that, I just kind of, or one kind of takeaway from that. Another one is when I was watching the video, I couldn't help but draw parallels between, that golden circle, but then thinking about the spirit, mind, body connection, and then the divine Trinity with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Just we like to work in thirds as human beings.
Yep.
So I think that, I don't know, but it's just things that kind of occur.
Thank you. Yeah.
Along with the marketing thing, this is, I don't know, this is, I think that honesty factor that you talked about is very, very important, that we don't have an alternative motive, the heart motive. And I think, God certainly wants purity in this area. And I heard a quote years ago that kind of helps us to figure out the difference between marketing and selling something and sharing faith. And it's, I'm butchering the quote, but I try to get the heart of it across. If people see or experience us, whether it's us personally or our church, they just see us. But if people see and experience God, their lives are changed. So it's just, it's just, that's really the heart of the issue, is that people find God.
I think that's why a lot of the early church growth experiences that I think a lot of people had, I certainly had, was that the why that was driving the desire for growth was we need more people on our committees, we need more funding for our stewardship campaign. It was all about the utility of supporting the church organization, not really about the love of God.
Yeah, our forward leadership community, we tell folks right off the bat, if you're coming to be a part of this, looking for an outcome like more people, more pledges, we tell them that's not why we're here. Why the community is coming together and learning together is to learn how to be the church in the 21st century, but also to be a transforming presence in their community. So it is very focused outward. And the congregations that come in have internal stuff they've got to work on, for the most part. We have some that are healthier than others. We're all in kind of, not too many are growing in terms of the people in the pledges. They're all seeing this decline, but not only a decline in those sort of physical things, but energy decline. They're feeling like they're going through the motions. They just like have lost their way. So yeah, immediately at the beginning we say, those are side effects. We're going to be focusing on being a transforming presence in your community, and re-engaging with your community, and carrying that. And that's where that presence of God and seeing that in one another as you're in the community. God at work, already doing great things. How do we join in? How do we connect?
A flip side to what Kevin said is a couple of times we've had people come, younger couples, whether they have children or not, and they don't stay because if it's a couple without children, they don't see a community that looks like them. So they're coming for community. We had another couple come, they had two wonderful little kids, just great little boys. And they stopped coming. Then I ran into them at Halloween, and they explained that they went off to a much bigger church, more conservative. But the reason they went there was because they had they had many more programs for their kids.
Yeah.
So again, that's another what thing. And I think it's interesting that there's these two tensions that we're both looking at it from a consumer perspective. And again, we're forgetting about that transformative presence, or being transformed or becoming transformed by, and not realizing that all of us together become this transformative presence if we are willing to engage in this faith.
The other thing that a lot of congregations assume that when you do the CAT, you'll see priorities, right? And the top priority is incorporate families with young children. Not every that's one of the oughts. We think this is what we're supposed to do. So it's always like number one or number two. But not every congregation is actually called to that. There's a anecdotal story of a congregation in Florida that's like near the Villages or whatever, and they were going to like have, they wanted to increase their Sunday school by 45%, blah, blah, blah. And the consultant just had to point out that your demographic is over 55, and unless you're reaching out to grandchildren, this is going to be really hard. So then it was like they went, oh, all right, we can do something, like they felt that pressure. It was like an albatross, like we got to get more young families and kids in here. And then they pivoted and started to think about how their ministry could connect with the people that are actually around, there. So that's why I said the why can be unique to your context. And that may mean you're focusing on folks in recovery, or you're focusing on, not that you're saying families with children can't be a part of your community, but it may be God is calling to you to be there for even a more specific group than that as well.
Next question, actually, Holly, you might know, what is the computer program, the thing that we had, hopefully still have?
We still have it. It's called Mission Insight.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
That
is like
the
map
will tell you
yeah.
what your demographics are in your town. And when I went to the training program to do it, that was what the trainer said. His church had always seen themselves, and as having this great youth program, and they couldn't understand why it was decreasing until they did this, and they realized that their community, the school population was lowering, and all of that. The fact is, the community was shifting, and therefore, the reason they don't have as many children in the schools, there's just not that many children in the town anymore.
Yeah.
And that allowed them to shift. Instead of putting all this time and energy into that, they could say, oh, we want to be God's presence for the people that are here,
right,
rather than the people who just don't exist here. So that is available, and it doesn't cost anything to your congregation to check that out.
What's the title again?
It's called Mission Insight, and there's a little process you have to go through. You can't just open it up today and get moving with it. So I will double check with the conference if we're still doing this. If we are, I'll give a brief training on it to people, because I used to be one of the trainers for it. But it does not just tell you like what your population is, it tells you income level, education level, religious affiliation or not. And it shows trends of how they believe it's going to go forward in 10 years. They compile from many different polls that go through. It's a little creepy, actually.
It is a little
No, it's way beyond that. And it's amazing, though. It's amazing information, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why I just wanted to say that in response to what people are saying, that we have the ability already to find out that information. I just well, at least we did. I just want to find out if we still do.
I think it's still funded, but Eric and I have been doing it. So since Eric left.
Right.
I recently did it, and I did a 3.5 mile
Right.
Radius around our church, and it told me information about what percentage of people were pro-choice and anti-abortion. It told me about what people were pro-gay rights and so forth. So it's more than just ages of people and how many kids in the community. It's actually somewhat belief system. And that is very enlightening.
Yeah, if you could use those tools and resources, I would recommend. I mean, we use them in our redevelopment and our mission development processes, and you can usually ask. You could do like 3 miles out, a zip code, or multiple zip codes if you're a regional congregation. So very helpful. You can get a pulse on what's happening in the immediate area. I'd also recommend, if connecting with folks one-to-one too. Yeah. Whether that's the local school system and the governance, or just folks on the soccer field and stuff like that too, to get the
I'm just saying
but those super helpful, because they just really drill down into political alignment and philosophical, theological. So I want to, just in the essence of time, one more comment.
One thing I think is really interesting to take this 3-part scheme and put it back onto Jesus and Luke's account. And I think, for me, one of the great distinctions is, are we following the religion of Jesus or the religion about Jesus? And when I read Luke, one of the interesting things to me, he doesn't get up. We talk about, it's hard to talk about being Christian. He doesn't stand up and talk about, I'm a Jew. He starts with his understanding of why he's there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if I think about a lot of our church, we start the what. The what is, we have good news. That's one of the pieces. And how do we have good news? Through Jesus. How does that happen? He saves us. Why does Jesus save us? Because God sent him to save us. Why does that happen? Because God loves us. For me, one of the striking things that's missing in that equation is, it's beautiful to talk about the grace and love of God, but I wonder what would happen if we'd add to it God's need. Could it be that, and this gets into some of the rabbis and Jungian folks that talk about, why did God create us? And one answer is because we recognize God needed us. But our theology overlays that with a whole different set of reasons, including sometimes an idea is that God doesn't need us. God creates us out of pure grace. But what if God really needs us? And what if we really believe that? And it's that important for creation, for redemption, rather than for destruction and loss.
Preach it. Sunday sermon right there.
There we go.
Can I add one other thing too? If we were to continue to read in that passage, though, Jesus had a very clear message to his hometown, and if we read further, we're going to find out that they tried to kill him.
Yeah, they didn't. Well, it reminds me of the parable where the committee comes out after they're shouting the good news from the roof, right? Like, we're going to haul you out and shut you down, right? So.
However, nothing could thwart God's purposes.
Yep. Amen. There we go. All right, so we've had a little bit of time to think about the whys and the whats. I would like you to open up your workbook here, and we're going to practice. So this packet is full of different tools and activities to help you tease out the why. And you can use one or two or all of them. It's not in order, but I would say use at least two of the activities that we do today in your congregations with your representation, your boards or your councils or your committees or teams, work with them, do a temple talk, and work with the whole congregation gathered, you know, after worship or something, and just play with the resources. We're going to practice today. I don't expect you to come up with your why by the end of today. This would be something you might work on over months. Maybe you will. I mean, that'd be great, but I would rather see it be a wider process within your congregation, so that the people feel like they have input and they don't have this dictated to them, because it will emerge from these conversations. So these are really conversation starters more than anything. So you see this little chart here. It says what you do and why you do it. So we're going to take a couple of minutes, list some of your what's, what you do in your church, but then go back and try to attach a why. Why do we do this? Then you may find, like, I don't know why we do this anymore. So we're going to take about 5 minutes to do that. And if you're here with a group, you can talk together as you're doing this and kind of can come up with a master list, or you can jot it down on your own first and then come together. So what you do and why you do it.
We're going to move over to that. It's just easier to talk because we've got a lot. That's okay. I think we did. We got deep. We don't have a long list, but we have it.
Good. Yeah, you guys have some. You getting there? Getting there?
We
Okay.
did a lot. Yes. We
Yeah.
did a lot.
Yeah. Well, this is a warm up. This is just like getting us. Yeah. Yeah.
I think you can't even cater to the needs or to the wants of people that are shopping or the consumer.
Yeah.
You just have to offer them God in the various ways of the life of the church.
Yes,
And I think that's who we are. Yeah, because you can't meet everybody's.
Okay, we're going to come back together. You can finish out your lists and round it out, discern that why. So any comments? Was this easy, hard, piece of cake? Did you get a whole thing of what's? Yeah, yeah. Interesting. How was it feeling, like, you know, like trying to figure out why do we do what we do? Any insights?
We need more of our congregation here to have this conversation.
Right.
Three of us know.
Yeah, yeah. Let's give it. Yep. Yeah.
She filled in for me when I was on.
I think
Okay.
part of an exercise like this, though, what can be great about this and energizing about this is letting it get a little messy and bouncing back and forth between the two. And some of the questions that bubble up out of it are just as intriguing as the initial task.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully that's what happens, like more questions, because you want to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. So as I said, like a lot of what we're going to do is like conversation starters that will lead to more questions and more conversations and more questions. So we're going to move on. We're going to think about lunch in about 20 minutes or so, if everybody's okay. No one's going to get a little faint or anything. There's a little bit. You could grab a strawberry. So as I said, I'm going to offer today a lot of different tools to help you discern that why.
Related to what you were saying too, is that, you know, these are great conversations to have with other people, and I'm going to fill in this paper and I want other will you be able to provide us with a template to
Yes.
do some of this?
Yep.
Okay.
I will.
Just so that, because at first I'm like, oh, I don't want to write on it because I want so.
I will send Jim the whole packet and the slides, and you can run with that. Yeah.
What was your question?
just that if we can have a template of this, because I think this would be great.
Yeah.
We can have those conversations with other bodies within our congregation. And I like the template. And I was afraid to write on it because I wanted to save it. So that's good to get others.
How does the why statement differ from a mission statement? It doesn't.
It's similar. So when we get to the end, right. It's very similar. A mission, and then what we say is a vision is actually, sometimes a vision is like the specific what's, right? So it's similar to a mission statement, so that it's going to have like two halves. The first part is your contribution. It's your congregation's identity and their sense of purpose. And the second part will be the impact. So you're going to see, this is who we are, why we are here, this is what we do, and why we do it. So they'll have two pieces. So it's very similar to what you would call a mission statement. It's just coming at it from a different angle.
Sometimes I've heard of vision and mission being, like, vision is kind of the why and mission is kind of the how. Like, if you think, and I'm in education, so vision is, I believe that all children can learn. And so the mission is, I will provide, our children need, that learn best when we tailor or we provide a learning experience that really speaks to them, that allows them to grow and flourish in their own right. And so the mission is, I will provide, we will provide those environments to do so. So I don't know if that's along the same lines as here, because it is.
They're similar.
They're similar, but I think the mission is more of a, kind of outlines like, how are you going to accomplish your vision?
Yeah, when we get further along, we'll unpack a little bit more like what we're talking about, the why. I usually think of a vision as how we want to see sort of this change in the world. Like that, it is like an actual, this is what's going to happen. We are going to feed 5,000 people. You get down to more specifics, with a vision. This is how we're going to change the world. A mission may be like we're about feeding people, right? And then you kind of dig more into what the vision is and how that particular mission impacts the world. So when you think of like the mission, the Great Commission, go and baptize and and then the impact is like we are ushering in the kingdom of God, right? And we're going into the world and to do these things. So spreading the good news. That's kind of similar to what you were saying. Yeah. So in your packet, you're going to see another page here. You can read this, A Step Toward Discovering Your Church Why. You can read this later. I want you to skip to this page called Conversations. So basically that other part I told you to skip is a little bit more of explanation on how to have these conversations and what you're looking for. We're going to practice the conversation. So the question, it's not complicated. This is something you can do in your congregation. Why are you a part of this church? So you notice say a part instead of a member. The idea is a participant in ministry. You don't have to just ask this question to your active members that are pledging, that are on the rolls. You're a part of this church if you participate in the knitting group, but you don't come to worship. Or so you can ask the member question if you're talking to a member, but think a little bit more broadly about folks that you would have a conversation with. So what I'd like you to do is find a partner that is not a member of your congregation. So you're going to ask them why you're a part of your church, not obviously New Heights. So we're going to get into pairs, ask this question, and what you want to dig down into is the why. They're going to tell you what. Most likely, our instinct is to say, because it feels like family. And you say, that's wonderful. What is it about that feeling that makes you feel like it's family? You keep digging in. So these are some prompt questions that will unpack that what. What are the feelings behind there? What was it about this experience you absolutely love? So maybe somebody mentions, like, I am a member of this church. We do this wonderful Christmas Eve service where everybody comes together and it's beautiful and it's candlelight. What is it about that experience? And, you know, keep pressing them, get into how did it affect you? Did it change the way you thought about the world? How did it, you know, you're going to keep asking and digging in and not letting them rest in a what. So we're going to take about 5 minutes and we'll do 6 minutes, I'm trying to think, 3 minutes for one person, 3 minutes for the other person. So one person will be the asker, the other one will explain why they are a part of their church. So you'll swap. In about 3 minutes, I'll prompt you. Right. So I heard some good conversations. I was like eavesdropping over here. How was that? It's kind of like you're an investigative reporter. You know, you're not going to let them off the hook. Was anybody able to articulate their why easily, or did it take a little bit of digging?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Was anybody? Did you need to do a bit of digging to kind of uncover, like, exactly, you know, like maybe start it out with a what and get down into a why?
Well, if you were given a response like, I feel blessed, now you've got to ask,
what is blessed?
Why?
Yeah.
Or how? How do you feel blessed?
Yeah.
I mean, the why is you feel blessed. But can you explain that feeling? Now you're into a different level.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's getting down in there, because a lot of times we'll stop. Oh, they're here for the music program. We'll just beef up the music program and it'll be great and everybody will come. But maybe there's something about the music program. Maybe it's the relationships that are built in that particular ministry where people are spending a lot of time with one another and practicing. So maybe the why is not particularly the music program, but that sense of connection and relationships that they're getting from that experience. So yeah, digging deeper underneath, you know, looking underneath and hearing what it is about, you know, being human and being in this community. What are some of the needs where we feel like we're feeling that sense of God's presence? As I heard you say, it's addicting and contagious. What is that? What is that? How do we talk about that? And can we articulate that? Because it's a lot of that feeling that's beneath that we have a hard time putting words to. Any other reflections on that exercise?
Well, it takes more than 3 minutes.
Yes. Yes.
Because I didn't give Jim a chance to talk.
And ideally, you'd set aside a good amount of time to do this with somebody. Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Something that Maureen said, it's what I pressed her and asked her, why, why? It was, and she responded, it's a sense of when you're in this community, it's reaffirming my own, beliefs. I think it's more of like beliefs about yourself and who you want to be as a person, and that there's other people there. And so, I wish I had just floated away where I was going with it, but I think that may be the true kind of thing, is that it's really reaffirming us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all kind of
Mm-hmm. And what you can do is have a number of these conversations, do it intentionally in your congregation, and keep notes and gather all that information together after you've talked to different groups, different demographics, different folks that are relating to your congregation, and look for any patterns. Some key words that keep coming up that speak to the DNA of your community of faith. What are some of the things that people are saying over and over again? Is it relationships? Is it a sense of sanctuary? It can be a few different things. So arising from those conversations. So I would you could make this fun. Do it, after worship, saying, all right, everybody grab a partner. We're going to do this for 15 minutes. We're going to keep you on hold here. Don't put your coat on. So it's a great way to get to know one another too. Some congregations, if you do have like more than one worship service, bring the two groups together. Get the younger kids having a conversation with some of the retired folks, but mix it up, and then they can hear different things. Like, the 12-year-old may have a very different why than the 72-year-old, but hearing that from one another, that's the other benefit of having the conversations. So this is a little bit of it connects with some other things that we do with our forward folks, which is we do we practice one-to-one relational meetings, which is the beginning sort of basic stuff of community organizing. It's asking open-ended questions to develop a relationship and learn more about one another. And it takes practice to not ask closed questions, because what you want people doing is telling you a story and encouraging that story and picking up on threads of that story. So it takes practice. It becomes more natural. I've been trained in some of that work, and my husband hates going to places with me because I have conversations with the person at the checkout. I'll have conversations like, he's like, oh, my children hate it too. But it becomes more natural. Like, we're here, we're kind of like doing it, and it feels a little more pressure, but as you do it, it becomes more natural. So I think this is a really good time to take a break. Does anybody else have any comments or questions or reflections on that exercise? Okay.
Just that we're of the same, we were partners in this, we're of the same personality type, but and I thought, well, maybe it's just the common thread between the two of us, but as people shared, there's one common thread that I picked up, and that's significance and identity. That people are want to be reassured that that God has a purpose for them, and the fact that God sees us, value in us enough to use us or to meet with us is a huge part of, I think, why people go to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm just really discovering it here now, that that is a significant piece of
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's personal, right? You're going to hear those personal stories, you know, of their connection, of their need, because obviously when you ask them why they're coming because they're looking for something, or they're coming back because they are looking and something is feeding them, or maybe something is not feeding them and they're moving in another direction. It's very personal, but I think you will hear patterns. As you're picking up, there's patterns specific to certain congregations. You may hear some certain phrases or words or something repeated as you collect different stories from folks.
We talked about, we heard the TED Talk and Apple having the product. Well, and Dave and I went back and forth with a discussion, and Dave came up with a great phrase, a great marketing slogan. And maybe slogan isn't the right word, but anyway, I'm using it. Water for the thirsty soul, which I really love.
That's good.
Going to church, water for the thirsty soul.
See?
Thank you, Dave.
You guys have a head start now. And the why question, I mean, it's used in a lot of corporate type of thing. There's a Lean Six Sigma kind of corporate thing that my husband uses, where they ask why 5 times if there's something wrong with the process. And it's helpful. It's helpful because you don't let yourself off the hook. You keep digging in. You don't just say something like, well, you know, the kids are going to soccer practice on Sunday and they're not coming to church. Well, why is that? Is it because soccer practice is at Sunday morning, or is it because of something else? Why, you know, why are they feeling community and feeling like this is more of a priority than coming to church? Or what is it about that? So you keep asking like this why question over and over again. It's critical thinking, but it kind of uncovers as you go along different layers. I feel like it's like an onion. When we take this problem that seems like there's no nut to crack, you can't deal with it. Like, soccer's going to be on Sunday, like, unless you have a massive protest in your town, they're going to keep doing the soccer on the Sunday morning. But breaking that apart and not just that being a barrier. So all right, what else? What else is here? Maybe we have something on the soccer field after, like you can be creative. It kind of, I don't know if anybody would do that, but maybe we do something Saturday night where there's a community type of thing, if they're feeling community that way. But it's uncovering from that problem into something a little bit deeper. Any other questions about conversation? All right. So I think
people wanted to see the sanctuary, so we'll do it after this is done.
Okay. Thank you. Everybody have a good lunch, get a little fresh air, visit the general store. I'm going to check it out, I think, after we leave here today. So we're going to go back and look at another approach to finding your why. So in your packets, there is a page that says your congregation's history. So if you want to look at that, so a lot of us have probably, if your congregation's been around for a while, you've got one of those little booklets or something like that from an anniversary, and you have all the key points in the history of the congregation. The organ was bought this year, and the pastor so-and-so came in this year, and then administrative assistant came and left this year, and all these like significant events. We put the new wing on the parish hall, a lot of stuff that happened. Maybe some events, new programs happen, changes in staffing and things like that. During the transition process for congregations in our synod, we do a history day as part of informing the site profile, we call it, where we walk through that whole history from the beginning when the congregation was chartered to the present. And we go by decade and we talk about each decade. We also talk about what's going on in the world at the same time, and just kind of see how maybe the events and things that are going on in the world, the culture, impacted or didn't impact at all the life of the congregation. One of the things we don't do, but we're doing now, is thinking about the meaning behind some of the changes that we make over the years. So this exercise is developed to help you think about not just the facts and the things or the events that happen, but what could be the why behind it? What it could be the meaning behind some of these changes, besides, you could say we put the wing on for Sunday school classrooms because we had more kids. But why did we have more kids? We can think about that. What was going on? Was it just because people were showing up at church and we're busting at the seams, or was there a different part of the culture? We know back in the 50s and the 60s, sort of the heyday of Christian culture, everybody went to church. It was the center of the community. There wasn't anything else to do. So that may be the meaning behind that, not necessarily tied to the why. But for some other things, there could be. So for this example, this congregation in the 80s, maybe they called a part-time pastor just for visitation, rather than have the pastor do that. Now, there could be a lot of reasons behind that. There might have been a lot of folks that couldn't make it to church, or they were sensing that there was something that they needed to do for their members. They care about the well-being of their members, and they needed to extend capacity. Maybe there was more loneliness, there more inaccessibility, a few different things like that. 90s, we launched a community healing service. So if I were looking at this and this was a congregation, I would see this care, this healing, this DNA sort of emerging from the timeline, right? But I would also see a turn from more of an inward focus to an outward focus, where they're taking that DNA, that sort of healing DNA, and it's helping them expand into the community. So when the conversations about a why, I'd say, let's think about this sense of healing and this sort of very, very close connection you have with folks like this on this level, and how that is changing from an internal to an external. What is driving that? What are some of the things below that? So we're going to take a few minutes right now and just go through, you have like a very limited timeline, think about some significant events, and start to ask questions about the meaning behind that. Is the meaning just because of the demographic? Is it the demographic and something else? Is there something else emerging? So it's discerning your why through the DNA that flows through your history. This is something that will take you an all-day thing to do in your congregation. And it's wonderful to get multiple generations together to do this and make it like an event with a party with people sharing stories. But the discernment process, the meaning process is really more for a smaller group that can really dig into that has some experience with that. But we'll take about 5 minutes, and you can do this in your team. teams, because people will have different experiences of your timeline together and no more. So just think about what happened in a decade, maybe one significant event, and maybe attach a meaning to it. What was important about it? It's kind of hard, you know, to think about why we do what we do. We're going back to that question. There is a on the back of that particular sheet, there's some more exercises in the back. And this is basically after you've done this with a group, you'll have a lot of different events and things like that. What do they say about you? Some of these meaning statements, can you find the patterns? Again, we're looking for patterns. We're looking for something like a thread that runs through things. So if you do this with your whole congregation and you have all of this input in terms of what's gone on, this historical memory of your congregation, and then thinking about, all right, why did that happen? Why was it important? How did we respond to that? How did we grow, or how were we stifled? You may even come up with some realizations like, well, this was all about just money, you know, and survival. And then having a conversation, well, what does that mean about our sense of mission and purpose? Maybe we were struggling during this period, we were a little lost, and how does coming out of that, maybe there is a conflict. I mean, don't just put the physical sort of events that happen, also talk about folks that left or arrived, or the conflicts that happened, some of the struggles that you went through, and thinking about like how you responded, and is there anything that moves through this? Like, even though we did this, we still continued, obviously, you know, this happened in 1960, but we're here, not the exact same people, but the congregation is still here. Is there something pulling us through this way that we can identify and articulate? So there's a nice like image here of a tree, and we talk about roots. Goes along with a few scriptures that you could put in there. Are we the dry fig tree, or are we the mustard plant? And we're just like a weed it's spreading around. So that's something that you can also use. We're going to take some time here, and I'm going to talk about the cat. I'm also going to talk about the cat afterwards. So in the context right here, I'm going to talk about the cat and how you can pick up some directions for your why in the cat. But after we're done with this section, I will also talk about the cat in general. So if you have questions more about the why, we'll answer those there. And then afterwards, we will get more into the cat and how to administer the survey and what to expect and things like that. So I know you haven't done the cat yet, and so I'm going to share some terminology. If you've looked at some of the sample reports, has anybody gone on and seen? So you've seen something called drivers of satisfaction and drivers of energy. They also have priorities. Those are places where you want more energy placed. Critical success factors. That's another piece. And then another thing we talk about right here is organizational culture. And that is also a page in the cat. We're going to talk about particularly the drivers of satisfaction, energy, priorities, and organizational culture right now, because it does relate to how your congregation is working together. Organizational culture is about relationships. Priorities are about what's. These are areas where you want something to happen. They tend to be more program and ministry oriented. And the drivers of satisfaction and energy are like the thumbprint of your congregation. So this is the places where when I mentioned DNA, these are some things that are unique to your congregation. So if you want to turn to this page, this gives you a bit of a definition about drivers, priorities, and culture. I also included, we're not going to cover everything here, but some of the definitions for the CAT. So when you're going to the interpretation, after you've administered the CAT and the consultant, which is either me or my colleague, have received the report, we'll most likely provide this to you again for your group that meets together. But there's a little preview of some of the definitions. So if you're one of those folks that like to study and be prepared, you can look at that. They don't have this on the website. Sarah and I developed this because it's very confusing for folks. It's not terminology that you normally use in conversation. So, and they use some of the terminology in a very specific way. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about drivers. And you have a copy of this in your packet as well. So you can see here, drivers of satisfaction and drivers of energy. I'll give you a second just to look at that. So satisfaction is not, when we think of satisfaction, we think it's like, I'm just satisfied, I'm happy. It's a little bit more than that. When we talk about satisfaction, we're talking about that sense of connection to God and one another as a community, as individuals, that relationship, that feeling of wholeness. And if you've heard of like that feeling of shalom, that peace, that wholeness, that holistic sense, that's what they're getting at with satisfaction. It's just not like I am just happy. You can be satisfied and not everything be completely hunky-dory everywhere, but you're feeling that sense of connection. And energy is that motivation, that connection to a sense of meaning and purpose, to why you were there, actually. People, that is that motivating factor. So when we look at this particular congregation, you can see they have 5 drivers listed. You can have up to 5 of these. And where they get these drivers is, there's another page that in the CAT that relates directly to satisfaction. And it says, overall, I feel satisfied with everything. I don't have that page in here with how things are going in my congregation. And what they found, Holy Cow has been working with this particular survey for over 25 years, and a lot of data coming in there. The data they've analyzed, looked at, tweaked, all of that, the questions that they asked. So what they found was there are specific questions in the assessment tool where if somebody responds in a certain way to that satisfaction question, they find it correlates to certain questions within the tool. So if you look at over here, you see a high or a moderate, and it can be very high. It can be moderate, it can be low, it can be very, very low. That's how strong the correlation is. And there are about, I can't remember exactly how many questions that have that characteristic. And so different congregations show different correlations, and they list the top 5 for your congregation. Now, if they don't see any particular correlation, you may have like only 2. So this is a little preview of what you're going to see in your assessment. So we look at these drivers. And these are the lenses that a congregation will look through when they are looking at that question, how satisfied I am. So the better they're feeling about it, the higher their level of satisfaction. The not so, if they're not feeling so positive about it, the lower. The same thing for energy, the ones they've identified for energy. So you'll see there's an energy question as well that will correlate to the energy drivers, and the energy is relates to going through the motions of activity. So we look at this in particular because these are unique. No congregation that I have come across has had the same set of drivers. So that when I talk about your particular why in your particular context, this is an indication of what is really unique for your congregation. And you look here and these folks have conflict, right? So a lot of times the congregations would be like, but I don't have it. We don't have conflict right now, right? And that could be true. But they find all this says, even a little conflict is very disturbing to this congregation. And that can be because maybe they came out of a conflict situation that was particularly nasty. They could be recovering from something traumatic. It could be just the history of the congregation. Some congregations, and that usually stems from something way in the past, but they are conflict avoidant. If anybody rolls an eye or raises an eyebrow, they drop the subject. We're going to retreat. We're not even going to talk about it. So disturbing amount of conflict does not mean there's active conflict in the congregation at that time. It could, but it not necessarily. And in this particular instance, this congregation will look at, they're a fairly healthy congregation, so it's just keeping that in mind. So when I look at that, I said, so what is that about, being so sensitive to conflict? Conflict is about relationships. It's being in relationships. And I looked through all of their drivers, and one of the things you start to notice is we see relationships, but we also see communication. So we have relationships. So worship is about our relationship with God and one another in community. We come together. Persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. So here we want to see that representation, that communication again. Pastor articulates a clear vision of for a church and keeps it before the people in a compelling way. That's a communication type of thing. Leaders of our church show a genuine concern to know what people are thinking. That's a relational communication thing. So we're seeing this carry through in the drivers. Drivers don't tell us exactly what the why is, but that detective work and thinking about what is this really about? What are we getting at here? Now you may have a congregation with completely different drivers. They may be more about education. You might see stuff like that. Some of them are more about hospitality. But this congregation, we're picking up something like relational and communication. And in communication, we think about, what is the churchy word for that? Is like evangelism, right? But keeping that in mind, that informs part of the why. This is not easy. It takes a little bit of thinking and digging in, but not taking something just at face value there. Any questions? But drivers is a kind of a difficult concept right there.
Trying to get a different word.
Too much. Sorry.
Well, I'm trying to think of a different word than driver.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, does that just mean it's important?
It's important. So another way to think about it is buying a car. I mentioned like what I look at like when I'm buying a car. I was looking for safety. I'm looking for bubble wrap around my entire family. I'm looking for 4-wheel drive in case, you know, the apocalypse happens and I need to like go off-roading and save my family. So that's what I'm looking for. My husband, on the other hand, he commutes an hour and a half to work every day. He's looking at gas mileage. He's looking at, you know, is this car going to be dependable? And you know, can I drive it for 300,000 miles? I can't do a hybrid because I've got to drive through the woods for 3 hours to go to work, whatever. So he's looking at different things. And that's sort of similar to like drivers. It's what's important. It's what your particular congregation feels connected to, the lenses, you know, like the lenses that they look through. We also find in the drivers a little bit more about congregations. So this particular congregation, we've got a little bit about leadership. We've got a little bit about the pastor in there, but it's not completely overt. So I would be looking as a consultant at that and saying, has then been a history or maybe something coming up with a power sort of struggle? There's a little bit of a governance thing going on. And during an interpretation, I just sort of ask like, so what's going on? Like, are people not communicating well? Different questions like that. So there are different levels to that. There could be power-focused congregations where you may have governing boards and maybe the clergy are at odds or two different groups. It doesn't even have to be them. And then it could be another one is a clergy-focused congregation where they see everything. Everything is centered on the on clergy. Doing that. Do you have
You got those conclusions from this data?
Yeah.
See why we need interpreters?
Sorry. And that's a little bit advanced. So when I look at this, yeah.
There's a lot of assumptions going on.
Right. So one of the things they found is, all right, so we have 2 governance questions, a clergy question, and then worship. And these are some of the like 3 key points when we're looking in terms of like a little bit of a power thing. And it's from experience. Except
except that it's all positive.
It is not. This doesn't.
Not talking about number 1, but when you're talking about the church leadership, and you're
right.
talking about the pastoral leadership, they're rating them equally positive as I look at this data.
So right now, when you look at this, this is not a rating. This is a correlation focus towards that.
But the vocabulary is rating high, i.e. worship services are exceptional. I think exceptional is a rating.
Are exceptional. And later in the report, you'll see whether they agree with that statement or disagree. So depending on the vitality of this congregation, which there's another piece of the report, they're either agreeing with that or they're disagreeing. So they value exceptional worship. That high score doesn't mean that they are actually have exceptional worship. It is just very important to them. Yeah. Yep. So if a congregation, if we find that their level of satisfaction and energy is very low, then we look back at this. What's going on with worship? If they are disagreeing with that statement, are people communicating? If their conflict management is low, I would look at them and be like, well, this is the biggie. We got to figure out what's going on and what's starting that. I'm sorry, you had a question.
You know, actually, you helped clarify a little bit. I think if I were taking the questionnaire myself and it asked me the question, do I value high quality and spiritual content, I would definitely put yes. But our church is in an interim period, and how I would answer it before interim is very different.
From
Our interim is fantastic. So I would answer it quite differently now than I would have before, and I don't know how I'm going to answer it when we get a new pastor. So
Right. This is a
how
now. Yeah. This is a now. Our worship services at our church are exceptional in both quality and spiritual content. If you're in an interim right now, so you're like thinking about today. We're not thinking about prior, right now. This is going to give you a baseline of today. And then if either it's fantastic and you say, what are we doing right now? That's really fantastic. And you can have those conversations. Or if it's like not so much, having that conversation is like, all right, where are these areas that we need to improve and what can we do to address it?
Very explicit in the directions. I've looked at our questionnaire, but I'm just thinking for our church in particular, making sure people get that point that it's right now.
For today, yeah, especially if you're in an interim type of situation, like we're talking about it right now. Is you don't have to think about 5 years ago or 6 months ago, or like today, this is how you're feeling in this process, because you are looking to call someone. And if worship is exceptional right now, then you want to talk about it as you're experiencing it right now.
So in the directions when you're going to fill that out online.
I don't know if it says right now. Yeah. Yeah. You might want to announce that if you think it'll be something that people have a difficult time.
In registering the pastor designation of the pastor,
right,
suggests that if the interim has been there more than 6 months, it should designate reference to the pastor as the interim.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that does go back. It was kind of a struggle to
figure
a sense of contrast. What's more important to the search committee in terms of results.
Right. Right. Yeah, and we can talk through that. And some congregations have interims for an extended time too. If it's an intentional interim during a term.
Right.
Are you?
I am not an intentional.
Okay.
We also
designate. Yeah.
But having been there more than 9 months, the letter is interim. It does raise some issues about. In fact, we need to be clear so when people
are registered, that they're thinking about the interim right now.
That raises the issue: have we done the work to work through, the issues around the former settled.
If the overall satisfaction today at this church is high, then that provides the church with a snapshot, I would think, of this is what we want the momentum to keep doing.
Right.
So the search committee has a better feel for, what's the benchmark here? What are we looking for when we're interviewing someone and looking at their profile?
Yeah, and when you look at these questions, even 9 months, even a year, a lot of the core questions things don't change that quickly. So it's part of who you were as well, unless there's some real dramatic split or something like that. And what we recommend for folks that do take the CAT during a transition is to even wait 3 years or more, because it really does take that long to see any significant movement. So even if you're in an interim, you're carrying through the stuff, right? The issues will come up that have been, if they have not been addressed. Any other questions?
I just want to clarify that I understand this. So on these things, it's not so much saying we have this or this exists in our church, but rather these are things that we value. We value a
Yep.
worship service that is exceptional rather than we value the fact that we have an.
Yep.
Am I correct?
Yep. Yep. And then later, yeah, later in the report, there's actually a section on worship, and you can see how people are feeling right now about it.
That's
Yeah.
two separate
Yeah.
things. Got
Yeah.
it.
But this is a little bit, this is sort of advanced why for you guys to unpack when you do get your CAT results. But I wanted to present this today, even though you're not there yet, you don't have your paper, because it is a useful tool to think about, because these are unique characteristics for each congregation. So when we are thinking about the why of the church with the big C, this is little c. And it describes a bit about your personality too, as a congregation. Any questions on that?
Before you finish the whole conversation about the cat, so you mentioned conversations.
Yep. Yeah, and that is a difference here. So drivers, you get that in the CAT report. You do not get drivers in the conversations report because it is a smaller assessment tool. But we can actually pull out some of the similar stuff from, it just takes more work to identify things that make your congregation tick. But with the conversations tool, we will look more at organizational culture and priorities if you're thinking about your why. We also, for this, drivers are helpful because they, a lot of times, they will point you to adaptive type of change. The CAT, the larger CAT, also gives you something called critical success factors. So they take out these things and they rank them as urgent or significant or addressed soon. So you know exactly where you need to go to make a shift, to have an impact on the health and vitality of your congregation, especially if you're seeing some significant issues. Conversations tool doesn't put it out like that. You won't get the critical success factors in that. But in the interpretation process, we can identify those specific places where you really need to place some energy and address adaptive issues. Any other questions?
One other question. How long does it take to do the CAT?
To actually,
Because we have people, we're trying to help people come take it. So we're going to bring laptops and let them come take it with us.
Yep.
But we have no concept of how long it's going to take to take it. So I would think people would.
they say 20 minutes, but I would give it a half an hour for each person. They're hard questions, but you're not really supposed to dwell on it too much. You're supposed to use that sort of gut reaction. But I would give each person about 30 minutes for the CAT. The conversations tool is much shorter, so that you could probably do in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So this is so blurry. It's small too, but you have it in your packet. So priorities, yeah. So those are the whats, and those are areas where congregations want to put more energy. They've identified. So you'll see at the top in this sample, you have make necessary changes to attract families with children and youth to our church. That is like if it's not the top one, it's the second one for nearly every single congregation that takes the assessment tool. It's like, this is what we want, what we think we need, this is what we want, we need to do this. Another one we see is comprehensive strategy to reach new people and incorporate them into the life of the church. That's usually 1 or 2 at the top. And then the third one we see all the time is about spiritual and financial generosity. So what are we looking for? We're looking for members and money. And we call those are growth. I mean, like, that's how we measure growth, right? And you know, it's the top 3 for about 99.9% of the congregations we work with. So, I mean, like, yes, those are good. Everybody's got it. What I like to look at is anything that is unique. So this particular congregation has enlarged and improved physical facilities. Normally don't see that unless they're planning something like a building campaign. So I would assume that this congregation is discerning or in the midst of, or something like that, a building campaign to expand their facilities, which makes me think they're growing, I hope, and they're not putting an addition on, hoping they'll grow. Hope they're already growing. And then you go down and you look at some of the ones that are lower, like your 4th, 5th, 6th priorities. And on the left-hand side, you see a rank. So one of the cool things about the CAT is the data that you're getting is not in isolation. They compare you to congregations that have also taken the CAT. So you see how you are in comparison to them, and how in general other congregations are answering the same questions and how they are ranking things. They have this huge database that goes back about 8 years. So they're drawing all that data from in there, and every time a new CAT goes in, it gets mixed in. So when you see something that is very high, like that second one, that means in comparison to other congregations, they're ranking that super high. That's unique for them. That makes them a little bit different. Average, obviously, that means a lot of other congregations are ranking that in the exact same way. So I always pay attention to things that are high, very high in that ranking. And then anything over a 3. And this congregation has a lot of 3s. They've got a lot going on. And then things can be low or very low because it's not on their radar, or they're already doing it well. Those are a couple of things. So this doesn't really tell you how they're performing in these areas. It just it indicates where they would like more energy placed. And for this congregation, I mean, like, they've got a lot of stuff about expanding and equipping and getting people involved. I mean, like, from this, you know, from their sample CAT, I'm like, they're busting at the seams. There's something going on here. And then their drivers point to relationship and evangelism. So you're starting to get like a picture of the congregation that could start to relate to why. So these are the whats. These are things that they hope to do, where they'd like more energy placed. So when you get yours back, you'll see a different set of priorities. And that can help you with your vision, your like impact. It's part of the statement. Any questions on that? This is like the easier part to understand. So then the other piece we look at is organizational culture. You can see this on something called the Descriptive Map. And then if you turn the page, you can see sort of a cheat sheet on what of all the cultures. They have different characteristics, they call them shadow sides and strengths in there. I like to think of this as kind of like the Myers-Briggs test for a congregation. So what they do, there are 2 questions that two different areas that they look at for organizational culture. One, they ask questions about theological perspective, either leaning more progressive or leaning more conservative. The other one is they ask questions about change, and primarily change in worship and how the congregation responds to changes in worship, in order to do that scale of more adaptable or less flexible. And that what they found is there are certain characteristics to congregations that are in different quadrants. So you're more adaptable, conservative. They call them a performance culture, and this one is here. So usually this type of culture, there's a lot of emphasis on transformation, conversion. When we think of maybe sort of that megachurch model structure, that's there, but you don't have to be a megachurch with the guitars and the screens and all that to be a performance culture. I'm working with a congregation in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is multicultural, and they have no screens, but they are very energetic. Let's just say their worship is absolutely over the top. It's wonderful. It's messy, but people get up. They give testimony about how God is working in their life. It's like, I'm like, we're Lutheran. But part of that is a lot of different cultures coming together literally in one space, and impacting that. And it has been translated into this high performance culture. Wonderful place to visit. But yeah, you don't have to be the megachurch with the screens, and you can see the characteristics on that other page. Discipleship is important for these folks as well. And of course they have their downsides. So some of these other cultures here, I would say majority of our folks are either in the Magi or the Paraclete culture. Magi, these are the folks that they love committee meetings, and we talk things to death. A lot of process. We love strategic planning in the Magi culture, as long as we got those things going. And then the Paraclete. These are congregations. They love hands-on serving the community in different ways. So I almost always see a healing service in that cult, or something akin to that. They're laying on hands. They're accompanying folks on one-to-one, very personal level. Magi cultures tend to be advocates. They're into, like, we're going to go and we're going to write the legislation. We're going to do all that. These guys, Paracletes will hold your hand. That's the difference for that culture. And then we have hearth and home. So these are settled. They're not very flexible at all. They tend to have a more conservative theological perspective. These are cultures where I always go in and they're like, we're like a family. We're like a family. And sometimes they are. They're like 3 families, and that's half the congregation, because it's grandma and it's aunt, and they've been there for generations. And like a good family, they are prone to conflict. And either they're conflict avoidant, where we will not say boo because Aunt Martha's in the room, we're not going to do that, don't want to upset her, or they go at it. And sometimes that conflict can spill over even into the community or town if it's like a smaller town. So these are characteristics. These are some of the DNA. And what I tell congregations to do is to look at this cheat sheet on their culture. Look at some of the strengths. And those can kind of connect with their why. You don't want to be who you're not. So you could, without thinking about who you are, you could come up with this wonderful mission statement, purpose statement that really isn't you. I would say, you know, I say like a magi culture, if they were looking to make some changes in worship and suddenly they, you know, they analyzed the data and they said, well, we need to do campfire worship outside and hold hands and have sharing time where we talk about our feelings. And I said, well, good luck with that. Do you want anybody to like go? Because that's going to be an uphill battle. And so recognizing who you are. So maybe a magi culture is more in tune to like, let's engage the community with a forum on faith and activism. So that may be more where they are in terms of connecting with their community rather than the campfire kumbaya service. Kumbaya service, Paracletes would do. They would love that. They'd hold your hand and do it. Performance may as well. But yeah, so knowing this, that can help inform your why. Any questions?
So the survey is going to tell us.
Yep. It'll both the conversations tool and the cat will put you in one of those. And that doesn't mean it will never change, but a culture change takes time. And it has to do with your history. It can be very, very embedded in your history. It can, and it can slowly change with the demographics of the generational demographics of a congregation. It has to do with the leadership. So if you know, you have a preacher who is more progressive, a pastor that's more progressive, the culture will sometimes shift, but it takes a while. If it has been really conservative, you'll probably have some resistance, like if we did had the two. But this can shift over time with change in leadership and also the change in a context. If your community is changing, you have immigrants coming in. We're seeing like this in our urban congregations. Just a whole new group of people coming in and being part of the community can change the culture of the community. But it is the leadership, and as generations pass it on, we're seeing some shifts as well in congregations that have taken this in transition, and we have seen shifts, you know, from here to here or here to here a little bit in 3 to 5 years, and that really has to do with the leadership that has been put in place.
And the placement of that dot also indicates the degree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is no culture that's really better. I mean, this is a description. It's not really a performance thing, but we do get worried when we see congregations like way down here and very, very settled. Because of what that means is if they are trying to increase health and vitality, it's going to relate to some adaptive change or shifts in the current culture. When they are very, very settled, that's going to be really difficult. So, you know, when we're looking way down here, we're thinking in terms of having outside coaching, consultants come in, extra help in the congregation to help them, you know, navigate that shift. So that's the only thing we really worry about. We also like congregations to look at the strengths that some of the other cultures have, because those are growing points for them to balance out. So a magi culture, they're not very relational in general, like the relationship kind of thing. They tend to be in their little groups and they're about business and things like that. So we tell them to look a little bit at the strengths of the other cultures, and you can work on that side. And also being aware of the weaknesses when you're falling into some of the traps that are typical for the culture.
So if your congregation falls close to that intersection line in the middle, does that just mean that you're, even though you're in that box of the Paraclete, that maybe you're leaning a little bit more? So you're sharing some of those other characteristics.
Right, right. Yeah. So like if I saw someone right here, I'd be like, well, you know, let's look at the Magi. Let's look at here and like, where are you seeing? Because this is not definitive. This is just sort of a blanket. And there are, when you get your report and we do the interpretation, I usually supply a more in-depth description of the culture. It's like a one-page thing that you can look at. And it's more for, you know, like, let's keep this in mind as we're moving forward, that these are some of the characteristics. And most of the time a congregation will be like, oh yeah. And sometimes there'll be a few different things that I don't know if that's us. But especially if they're in that sort of middle, they'll be picking up from the other cultural characteristics there. Any other questions on that?
What kind of an impact is one one survey going to have on the overall? I mean, I know it depends on how many numbers there are total, but if you have a survey that seems to be an outlier from others that you collect,
if there, you may, I was mentioning over here, you may have, if you have a small number of respondents, so at in the report, it'll block out the percentage of who answered what way. You may see 3% disagreeing on like everything. Like there's this, and you can pretty much figure out maybe who that is because they may have been vocal about where they stand. But it doesn't really impact the rest. So one sort of negative person or one person that has an agenda is not going to impact, especially if you have a good response rate. And we like to see, they base it on average worship attendance. I'd like to see like 70% if we can do that. They don't need that much for it to be statistically valid. And I'm not going to tell you how much because I want you to do 70% or more. So you shoot for that number. So that one person that may just have some issues with everything, they're not going to have much of an impact. Yeah. They'll make you wonder what they do like about anything, but that's about it. Any other questions? No. Okay. It's a lot to take in, and I know you haven't seen your cats yet, but I would recommend that you look at the sample reports now that you know. They do have them on the Holy Cow website. You can look at the sample report. Know a little bit about how the data is going to impact how you think about adaptive change and your why.
Can I ask one more question about this?
Sure.
So I, registered the church and got my conversation. Now is that a link that everybody's going to use?
They send you a link with the prepared survey ready for your congregation. Have they done that?
I think so. But
okay.
If they haven't, then they will.
Yep.
If what I got was a link to the congregation, then I would send it out to everybody to use.
Yep, on your email list, contact list, you send that link. I have gotten the questions like, well, what if there is somebody that wants to stack the deck and answer multiple times? They don't run into this, but they do have they don't know who's answering, but they can see where the address is coming from, the IP, and they will flag anything that looks really suspicious. I usually say just tell them if you're going to have the laptops, somebody's going to be using one laptop a lot, just because, but yeah, that they don't track, they're not going to ask people's names and things like that, but they can, if it looks like if you have a suspicion that something's going to happen, they can keep an eye on it.
Yeah, but we have some people that don't use computers.
Yep.
So that's why we thought we'd set up the laptop.
Yeah, yeah, and that. Yeah. And if you have.
So should I write to Robin and just tell her
that you're doing that? Yeah. Yeah. And the other option is you can print out the PDF and have them handwrite it. Just means that somebody has to enter that information online.
It's just going back into this one computer.
Yeah.
Anyway, so.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
That's us. So thank you.
And they will do it. You could send the paper to them, but they charge you a lot of money to input the data. So if you have a volunteer willing to do that, ideally everybody does it online themselves, and that takes care of it.
And also in the instructions for the paper forms, it says if they skip a question,
yeah,
it voids every question they answer after that point.
Yep.
Because you can't skip a question online.
No,
Doesn't allow
it makes
to do
you.
that.
It will actually take the information up until the point that they skip, and then nothing. Yeah.
Is there an age, like this should be done by? I mean, can you have we have active teens?
Yeah.
To do it.
So whatever age, we like 15 and up, like high school. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna ask a 4-year-old.
Right. No.
No, I'm
yeah.
talking, like they're members of our church.
Right.
You know,
right.
we
Yeah.
want to include
Oh
them,
yeah. Yeah.
at least invite them to.
Definitely. And then the other question I get is, what's a member, right? Some there are some people that come religiously to worship and activities, but have never become a member. I would include them as well. Yeah.
I was thinking, because we talked about it, that people who are actively participating in the life of our church.
Yes.
Whether their name is on this list or not.
Right. Yep. Yep. You want to make sure they're included as well. Any other questions about the CAP?
When you do the evaluation face to face, is that recorded? I mean, can churches record that? What do you recommend, or what happens?
They can, if they want to record it, we can do that. What I give each congregation is I have a report that I annotate with notes. So I give that to the congregation as well. So they'll have, a little reminder of what we talked about, and I highlight different sections, and Sarah does the same thing. So you have that document. Then if you wanted to record it, the video, that's fine. That's fine with me. Sarah's had it done too. So. Okay. A lot of stuff. Everybody looks tired. So we have a little bit of time left. So one more tool I was going to share with you is listening to the Bible, because we're church people. What are we going to do? Obviously, the CEO of Apple or chairman of the board of Morgan Stanley is not going to, maybe they are, use this tool. So this is very, very, very pertinent to our context here. So you have in your packet listening to the Bible. The question we asked is, where do you see the life of your congregation in Scripture? Today. So this is just something you could do with the Bible study, different groups, maybe like a day-long retreat, is getting folks together and thinking about that. And that's individually. They could even do this at homework. Where do you find our congregation in Scripture today? What is the story? A story, a verse, a character, an epistle, anything. Where do you find it? What resonates with you today in our congregation? And then listening to that, thinking about it, and then coming together and sharing with one another. So this is another one where you go individually and then you come back together. Folks will have different stories, which is beautiful, because then you can kind of discern, like, well, is this today? Is this yesterday? Is this tomorrow? Are these different aspects of our ministry? Because people have different experiences of your congregational life. So this is something that I would say, if you're going to do like in order, you may want to do this one first, to set the tone for a process where you're discovering your why. I would also do, in combination with having people tell stories, why you were here, why you were part of this church. So those are the two, like, kind of set the scene on discovering your why. And we included here on the second page, there's a cheat sheet of stories, possibilities of characters, people in the Bible. And I will challenge you to think outside of the box. So I had a congregation who felt stuck and sad. They're declining. They're seeing smaller numbers of coming and participating in the ministries. And so they did this little exercise, and they came back, and they said, we're Jonah and the whale. This is where we are. We're just running away. We don't want to deal with anything on the outside. We don't want to do it. I don't care if God's telling us to go do this. We don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to go. Go. And I said to them, I'm like, well, okay. You can work with that, right? So we got to talking, and I was like, I don't think you're Jonah. But what we decided was they were the whale. They were the whale. They were a place of safety and sanctuary for people to just kind of go through this process. I don't know where God is calling me. We're the whale, place for reluctant prophets to sit and discern. How are they going to move forward? So they were the whale. So if you're, looking through this, look at it sideways. You might find, okay, we're the Good Samaritan. Look at it sideways. Like, is there something else into that story that also talks about you? And maybe in a different way, and maybe in a way that opens up different possibilities. So up, down, sideways, inside and out, listening to scripture, doing it together as a community. If you can start with that, it's a good way to start the direction of going towards your why. I'm not going to have us do this today because you guys are going to, you're going to have to take a lot of time and brain power, and we're getting the afternoon slump. So this is we're on our last page of the packet, which says, we believe. So when you take all of the tools and things together, what you find is a list, a group of words and phrases, a lot of bits and pieces that point you in different directions. So what it is helpful to do, and if this is your team that has been working on in this process, or your council, or bringing those folks together, is to get together all of your notes, all of your listenings, all of your learnings, pray over them. Take some time, read them through, recite them, say them out loud, offer some time of silence and reflection, and then list your we believes. One of my favorites, we believe that God is still speaking. Familiar, right? we believe that all people are created in the image of God. So these things will bubble up. They'll bubble up from things you've identified in your cat, things from your history, things from your conversations, coming together and making that list. I mean, and it doesn't have to be 100 things. It's actually better if it's about 5. And if you can get it down to 5 core beliefs, something that you can just do this, because we like our fingers, it's easy. But narrow it down. And it does not, we have the Apostles' Creed. We have that. We have the Nicene Creed. We have the Great Commission. This is what you believe as a congregation on top of that, right? That has to do with who you are right now. I would take a good afternoon, a couple of days just to do that. And then you can move on to articulating your why. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a structure that we're aiming towards, which was a contribution and an impact. I see a lot of mission type statements that are a great description. What they lack is the impact side. How is this impacting the world, the community, people outside of our congregation, outside of what we do just right here on Sunday or as a church? So, and part of this is you don't have to use this language. It's using the idea of this language. So 1, 2, so that you might recognize is, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life. Scripture is full of so that. This isn't outside of the realm. So that is a big so that. This is what is happening in the world. So when you are thinking about your why, you want to think in terms of not only who you are and what you do, but why is that important to the world, your impact on the world. So Simon Sinek, who does the Start With Why, his statement is to inspire people who do the things that inspire them so that together we can change the world. So we know a few things about Simon and his beliefs from that, that drive his why. He believes he has the gift to inspire people to do things that inspire them. So he really believes that. And he also believes change is possible when inspired people work together. Now, he didn't say that right out, but we can tell that from his statement. And that's taking just like 2 of those core beliefs in there. So this is the shift. It's taking that list of beliefs and articulating it into who we are and their impact in the world. And doing it in 15 words or less, hopefully. That's the key. That's the key. If your 2nd graders or 3rd graders are able to articulate that, then you've got a very, very clear why. If they can't, then go back and they can understand it. So that's the other piece. We were talking about acronyms and churchy language. They can articulate it and they can understand it and they can tell their friends.
Do you have another example besides that church in Vermont that you gave us earlier in terms of a quick why? It's very succinct.
Rooted in God's love, so that, or they say, to serve our neighbors. That was another one similar to that. So it's like a two pieces. That one in particular, it's a newer, younger congregation, and the emphasis there was that we don't just that they wanted to come in. We're rooted in love. We're not. It's sort of defining. We're defining ourselves against some of the other folks that define themselves as exclusionary and things like that. So that was theirs, and then the impact statement is so we can go out and serve neighbors. And their particular emphasis when you talk about a vision, they are very focused on children and those experiencing homelessness and poverty. And where those intersect, they have three main ministries that they work with for that. And that is just let them let go of a lot of stuff that they felt like they ought to do, but was draining energy. Yes. You couldn't get people involved. And they were just forcing. And then they reevaluated, said, we're going to just align with this. And so three main ministries that they work with now, which is they do a feeding ministry where they go out on a truck to where folks are either in temporary shelter or they're sleeping outside, and they give them a hot meal and clothing and connect them with some resources. And then they work with children in foster care. So there's a theme there. And then they also work with an organization that goes around to grocery stores and they collect food to redistribute to food pantries. So stuff that goes on the edge of expiration or whatever, or the fruit that looks a little funny, they grab all that and help them with that. So they've really focused their ministry. That's another feeding one. That's interesting that they've done that. But so that is bringing us back around to Luke. So looking at this again, what do you think about why? And Jesus, why? Can everyone see it? Do we want to read it again?
I guess I would stay with what I said the first time. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me.
In a way, this is the contribution part. It's also what he's looking at. It's including that, the why, the motivation that Jesus himself has to do with who he is. It does have to do with who he is and why he was there and why he feels called. And looking through, I jumped over to Luke 23 because I wanted to find sort of a so that. So in Luke 23, verse 29, Jesus is saying, I confer on you, just as my Father has conferred on me, that anointing, right? A kingdom, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. You'll sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So his motivation is for us. for those folks there that he's speaking to, but also for us, so that we receive this anointing in the body of Christ as well. So I hope that we stretched you a little bit today, and then you think about your why and your so that, your mission, your purpose, your vision, and to keep that vision forward as you're moving through your discernment process, as you're moving through adaptive change. Because one of the biggest questions that you will get as you're navigating change, as you're facing challenges, is why? Why are we doing this? Now you can say, because we're dying. That is not always a motivator. Or we need more money, or we need more members. Yeah, we know that. But if you can get to that heartfelt, why are we here? Why has God called us to this place in this time? That will help move people. So thank you so much today. And I am here to answer cat questions as well. For anybody that has, in general, a cat question. I also have some materials here that I didn't bring enough for everyone, but if you wanted to just look at, and you can take some of these home. It's like a mini version of a cat report. I didn't print out the whole thing, is like 30 something pages, but it just gives you an overview to talk with folks. So I have a few copies of that. You can look at the conversations tool and compare it to the cat. I also have frequently asked questions. It's on the website. So it's, yeah.
The evaluation thing that you just put, is that on the website? Or
This is, yep, this is a little piece of it. It's sort of the key pages in it. It does, I didn't print the whole thing, but to look at that, this is frequently asked questions. That's the conversations tool. And I think that's it. Well, thank you so much, and good luck. I will pray for all of you.
I want to say, besides thanks to Kim, you could probably pick this up from her general attitude. But one of the reasons she was so willing as a Lutheran to come work with us in such a giving, caring way is that they learned all about it from the Episcopalians. So they're paying it forward.
Yes, we're paying it forward.
And you're heading out of the name tag.
And thank you to the Newfield Church for hosting us.
Yeah.
Harvard, you'll be headed to 495 Route 2 area in Massachusetts. We'll send out some information as we send.